What is it with basements? I've decided maybe the best way to tell all that happened to me in my parents' house was when I was a teen, was to take the house level by level since I experienced something on every single level of that house. The first story I wrote talked about the voices I heard and my very first experience in that house. I'm going to tell about all the things that I remember happening in that basement. First of all, when I came home from school that day and heard the voices, that wasn't the only time I heard voices from the basement. There were more times. It got to the point where if I had to go to the basement for anything, I would mentally prep myself. If I was home alone, I might start by turning on the light at the top of the stairs and yell, "I'm coming down now." Then, I'd start down the stairs and while I was going, think of some song to sing at almost the top of my lungs, or I'd hum very loudly. I had started doing this because of the voices. When I did this, I heard them less. As far as I know, no one else in my family heard the voices. However, my brother and sister are both hearing impaired, so they wouldn't have noticed anyway. My mom only went downstairs to do laundry, and she never mentioned anything, but once she told me she wasn't much of a believer in ghosts. She said she believed in them some, but certainly not in our house. We had a little dog when I lived there. We had her ever since she had been a puppy. She was supposed to be my dog, but she attached herself more to my dad. If my dad was not home, she was happy to follow me around. We called her Weenie. Weenie didn't like the basement. In fact, I go as far as to say that I think Weenie was scared of the basement. If I went to the basement, Weenie stopped at the top of the stairs and just stared at me. She would put her tail in between her legs and put her head down as she stared into the basement. She'd wait until I came back upstairs and follow me around some more. There were a few times I picked up Weenie and carried her down the stairs with me. These might have been times that I needed extra courage. Weenie's body would stiffen up as we went down the stairs, and as soon as I put her down, her tail would go between her legs and she'd head for the stairs to go up. I can remember turning around to look at me a few times, then she'd run away. As soon as she got up the stairs, she'd stand there, tail between legs, head down, staring into the basement. It was kinda creepy. I never understood why she didn't want to be down there. My dad had an experience with Weenie acting strangely in the basement too. My dad was disabled from an accident working for the railroad, and so he was home a lot. He would go downstairs and put wood in the wood stove or do some laundry. He talked about how Weenie wouldn't go downstairs with him either, and how when he put her down, she'd run upstairs with her tail between her legs. He talked about how she shook. I never noticed shaking the few times I took her down. He said he'd call her and ask her what was wrong, but she'd only stand with her tail between her legs, head down, and refuse to come downstairs. Weenie didn't like the upstairs either, and I'm sure she would be mentioned when I discussed my numerous experiences there. He was telling me one time about how he was putting wood in the wood stove. It was so cold down there at the time, and he spun around with a poker in his hand because he swore someone was behind him. I don't consider this part of the voices, but maybe I should, because he told me another time when he was in the basement, he swore someone came in the house because he heard his name was called. He said he figured it was our neighbor across the road. It was a rural area, but we had a neighbor kind of across the road, and he yelled, "Yeah, Lyle, I'm down here in the basement." He said he quickly finished throwing the wood in and headed up the stairs talking the whole time, only to find no one upstairs. This is the scariest experience I had in the basement. Technically, I wasn't in the basement, but it involved the basement. I thought it was my mom at first. I was on the phone with a friend, and I was in the kitchen. It was night because I remember it was dark. There was light on in the living room, but not in the dining room or kitchen. I heard footsteps from the basement coming up the stairs, hit the top, and go back down the stairs. I thought it was my mom doing laundry. I heard her go back down the stairs and start back up. About this time, I noticed the light wasn't on going down the stairs. That didn't make sense to me. Whatever it was hit the top step and started back down. After that time, I knew for certain it wasn't my mom, and she wouldn't have come back up dark steps anyway. I bent backwards so I could look in the living room and realized the entire family is in the living room watching TV. Whatever was in the basement had hit the bottom and was started back up to the top. I remember walking backward from the kitchen area, but making sure I could see the entrance where something would come from the basement. I hear whatever, hit the top step again and start back down. I went and sat at the dining room table and twisted myself so I could see the step. I stopped hearing it at that point in time and never did see anything. Putting it down, it doesn't seem so scary, but at the time, it most certainly was. The steps still bother me, but perhaps that's because the steps going upstairs are another story I will share when I tell about what happened in the upstairs of that home. I wish I had the courage to have turned on the lights and went and looked to see what was there, but like with most things in the basement, there probably would have been nothing to see. I have recently developed an odd suspicion of the basement in my house. This might sound a little bit strange, but I honestly don't know how else to word it. I've had a weird experience down there before involving a cold spot on the floor and the scent of campfire smoke around that area, but that was described in more detail in one of my previous experiences. Since that experience, I'll admit that I have been a bit more on edge than usual, so these could be the result of an overactive imagination, although not everything has happened to me. The first and least phenomenal of the things I'm about to list is almost a constant feeling of being watched, not maliciously, just vaguely observed as though the spectator has nothing better to do. The second thing is the amount of strange smells I noticed down there. Now let me say that my mom does have a little room in the basement where she makes candles, so some of these could be a result of that, but I don't know how good the candles are at creating the smell of onions, and frankly, most of the smells aren't terribly candle-like anyway. I can't identify most of them, and it seems to be different every time I notice it. The third thing is seeing things that aren't evidently there. For example, earlier this night, I was watching TV down there by myself, and I thought I heard my sister start down the stairs. Figuring she was trying to be sneaky, I observed as best I could out of the corner of my eye what appeared to be her wrapped in a blanket, not unusual behavior, walking quietly down the stairs. I can't explain why I suddenly decided to whip my head around, but when I did, and it wasn't her at all, but what looked like a shadowy blob about her height. The final thing is something my friend told me. She'd come over for a sleepover one night and we were hanging out in my basement when we decided we needed to shower because we felt gross. It had been a hot day. As a result, she used my basement shower, and she later told me that when she'd gotten out, she'd felt something cold against her back. I asked if there was a pressure, and she said no, also confessing that it could have easily just been the fact that she had turned off the shower. I don't really know what to think, so I decided to include this as well, even if it turns out to be nothing. And now, I ask for your opinion. Is there something or someone in my basement? I've never done any Ouija boarding, and the best thing I can think of was my brief fascination with Wicca nearly 3 years ago and attempting a spell down there with some friends. I honestly don't even remember what the spell was supposed to do. Thanks for reading my experiences. I hope we can discover what this actually is, because I'm not sure what entirely happened. During one summer, it was me and my older sister and my cousin Eric. He had come down for the summer and the basement was our little hangout at the time. We were just downstairs in the basement playing cards and talking, then out of nowhere, everybody had gotten quiet and I did not know why. A second later, I heard a little girl voice say, "Look," or "Look back there," in my ear. And then my older sister said she saw a black shadow go past my shoulder. So I look in the back of the basement. Mind you, no one is back there and the lights are off in the back. And then I hear a nail of some sort get dragged across one of the workbenches we have in the back. And then we all hear a ping on the ground, look at each other, and ran upstairs because we got scared. Then 15 minutes later, we go back downstairs and check in the back on the floor to see if anything is on the ground, and one single nail you would screw to the wall was lying there. We all looked at each other and ran back upstairs and did not bother to turn off the front light. We tried to tell my parents about it, but my mom kept denying it, saying there was no such thing. But my father, he believed us because he said he experienced some paranormal events in the house. My mom had said once she saw a white shadow of a little girl in her room doorway, but she keeps denying it was something paranormal, and she had come up with an excuse for it. To this day, she still will not admit that paranormal occurrences happen. I still get scared going in my basement, and I'm sure as hell not going in there anytime soon. When I was younger, I had a wonderful imagination. I could take circles and turn them into balloons. I could take a string of yarn and turn it into a rabbit. But my imagination would not be the cause for the experience that I am about to share with you. Before I was born, my great-grandparents had passed away, along with numerous other relatives, and when I was younger, I had no idea who these people had been in life. I can only give you a time period of 1998 to maybe 1999, so I was around 2 or 3. We lived in a house that was a bit out of the way of everything else, but still close enough to town to be considered part of Copenhagen. I wasn't afraid of much during this time period, and the only thing that sent me running was the bad man. He appeared to me as a gruff fisherman type. He wore a yellow rain slicker and a pair of black rubber boots. He had tan, leathery skin and had a plethora of scars on his hands and neck. His hair was thick and black, and he had a quite extraordinary beard. He wore a hat that matched his rain slicker and always had a cigar that he would smoke. Whenever I smelt the smoke, I would instantly begin to cry out or chant frantically, "Bad man," all while trembling, staring at a space in the basement where he inhabited and pointing. My mother was perplexed by all of this, and one day, while my mother was talking with her cousin in one of the rooms of the bisected basement, I came bursting out of the other room, screaming my little chant of "Bad man." My mother and cousin looked at each other. My mother scooped me up, and they ran up the stairs. At some point, I remember what scared me about the bad man and told my mother that he had laughed at me and attempted to put the cigar out on my flesh. He didn't get the chance, but I knew that he would have done so if he could. Another point in time, my mother got a boyfriend 3 years later after my father had been killed by a police officer whom was under the impression that he had a weapon on him. Her boyfriend, whom is now my stepfather, said that watching me peek back and forth to look at something only to scream and take off running was particularly unsettling. At some point, we moved from the house when I was 5, and I haven't seen the bad man since. To this day, it is still unclear to me on whether or not he was a deceased relative, a spirit, or a demonic entity.